Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I'm just checking that it was actually recording. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing? So, for those of you who haven't seen me before, you really missed out. I've been giving a series of talks as the resident speaker of VideoBrains on a psychogeography of games. Walking places with game designers, people who make things in places that are important to them, and talking to them about how place and environment affects the work that they make. So this is the last one. It's a walk that I went on with Llaura Dreamfield. That's its 3 E's, Llaura Dreamfield with 3 E's. And you can find it on Itch. I think she's possibly like having a Twitter hiatus at the moment, so like having put the Twitter address up there. Is she not?
No, she's back.
Okay, great. She is back, and you should definitely follow her. She's super great. She does really great stuff in Ireland. Just finished running Ear Goat Festival with Thrin at the back, which is a super cool mix of art and zines and game chat. This is the final talk that I have for you. One of the things that Llaura particularly spoke to me about was how important moments are to her, as opposed to trying to put a full overarching narrative on anything. I've done some conceptual stuff for you over the past few months, but for this one I thought I'd return to a more sort of stripped down snippet kind of series of moments that reflect on the walk that we did together. The final thing before I start is that this talk, it comes with a free mix CD. Actual genuine CD or URL zip file download. You can come and, if you didn't get one in the break, you can come and get one off me after the fourth speaker in the next break, which I think will become clear throughout why I've done that. There'll be some lyrics behind me. Don't feel like you have to read them because they're going to be up for a super long time. You can listen to me and just glance at them, but those lyrics are taken from the songs that are a part of the mix CD, and they're CDs that I was listening to when I wrote the talk. Those are songs that were important to me and reflected on what Llaura was saying to me. Shall we begin?
Yes.
Are you sitting comfortably?
Very.
Well, I can't get you a cushion or anything. I'm just going to have to be slightly uncomfortable. It was a false promise on my part, I'm sorry. This is how it starts. It starts with the sea. A child, small, dwarfed by the rocks and the waves, shrunk both by the scale of the Atlantic and the quality of the men that roughen their hands on board fishing boats across ropes and nets in salted, cold, burnt skin. A child laughing. Before the child is full of ideas of everything they aren't that they should be. Before then, there is just the child and the sea. The Atlantic. Big and wild, an ocean officially, deep and driven through with currents, violent and warming, life-giving and lethal. A small child in the port town of Killybegs. As I write this exact paragraph, the one that I'm speaking now, that I will later copy and paste into the text which is in front of me, I'm sat in Holyhead Station at 2:09 a.m, 6 hours into my 14-hour journey back from Dublin, where I walked from the pier at Dunleary to the top of Three Rock Mountain, where you can see the whole of the bay. When we get up to the mountain, there's rain. Only a little. It dusts us, but from where we stand we can see it heavy down by the sea. Big and thick it lays across East Dublin, a rainbow squatting down over the city with it. The bay looks the same shape as it does on Google Maps, which somehow, looking at it, surprises me. Like a little croissant curled up around the sea. It began with the sea. The child plays in the Atlantic, not with the confidence of a swimmer, but with the wholeheartedness of someone willing to be afraid. The child allows the wave to take, neither cutting through it like someone who understands it, nor resisting like someone unwilling to. The child is breath-knocked, pulled, pushed, swirled, gasps and saltwater eyes, clinging hair. The child is with the water and the child alive. Llaura is interested in materials, in immersing herself in the material of things, of finding ways to understand the materials she works with, the grain of them, by working with and against that grain. She likes contrast. She'll write an ending that might be considered the right ending, like in her award-winning PC game, Curtain, and play upbeat punk music over it, but leave the oppressively sized text box of the antagonist in place, her voice threatening to return. She'll make a lit window, a twine game, for gritty urban streets and score it with chamber music, classical chamber music. She searches for contrasts in particular, by drawing on other art forms as well as games too. In fact, Llaura explains the biggest step forward in her practice was attending a writing group, learning about storytelling from a creative writing perspective. She says, I learned more in the 6 months or so I was part of that group, going through different processes to try and write something, sharing work with others. I learned more about making video games and what actually matters than everything that had come before that. All these practices that are pushed upon you, good games practices, like thinking of games as design. And there's an implication there with the word design that there's a perfect game, like there's a perfect kettle or a perfect chair, you know? It's a terrible thing, a meaningless term. I think of games in a very different way because of that writing group. Llaura describes being influenced by media journalism, poetry, Rebecca Sugar and Steven's Universe, philosophy, David Kanega. She says, who comes from a different background also. He's so fresh compared to the other people out there. In terms of games, there's not that many people who influence me. But she does talk about going for walks, simple walks with other friends and peers in the countryside of Ireland around her. She says, at the same time I joined the writers group, I was also meeting up with a friend of mine who also makes DIY games. We'd go for hikes around Ireland, and it kind of felt like, looking at his stuff, I began to think about how I could approach my stuff in a similar way. When Llaura does talk about games influences, it's people from the rapid-fire, highly experimental end of game design, people putting out hundreds of vignette games a year, playing with plasticine and felt tips, Game Maker, Twine, work by people like the Catamites. Unknowable love stories in space, instructions to seek out a valley given a map which has no valley on it. A mission into an old building which is haunted by strike-through italic text, a game called Frank Tomato HD that somehow managed to unsettle me more than any horror game I have ever played. A good place to start with the Catamites, by the way, are his 50 small games. When bought on itch, they come with an HTML document of notes, like liner notes for a mix CD. An incredibly thorough account of where each riff came from, how and why each experiment came together. It's personal, autobiographical, and DIY in a sense I've recognised from basement gigs and warehouse performances. The DIY scene is a landscape that I feel most clearly shapes Llaura's practice. It's just fucking do it. Use whatever tools you have. 3 chords, felt tips, glitter, and a photocopy, a Game Maker, Twine, a Tintin comic, and a deep interest in the provenance of Irish place names. Start with who you are. Pick up the tools you have. If they're the wrong shape, then break them and build them again. The DIY scene, the scene where art divisions are less carefully policed, where music spills over into art and writing, and yes, games, is at the heart of Llaura's practice. From DIY two-piece at the centre of Curtain, to the piles of records and dueling sounds of Istanbul, Texas, and in the zines that she makes, the art fairs that she puts on in Dublin. I sleeplessly reread her late-night reflections on Become a Great Artist in Just 10 Seconds by Michael Brough and Andy McClure on the ferry back to Holyhead. That's where these images are from. That's a playthrough I did trying to make some sea. I'm coming down with a cold. on the ferry. My throat is scratchy, I'm exhausted. All I want is hot chocolate and bed, but that prospect is more than 27 hours away. I suck expensive ferry strepsils and read her zines. The tiny pixelated print laid over brash accidental art spells out a notion that makes sense of Llaura's work even in the midst of my maximum sorry for myself. Perhaps the start is to look at the world and everything and everyone in it, not in terms of how it can accommodate us, but how we can accommodate and value them for themselves. So Llaura and I talk as we tramp up 20% gradient L roads that I eye with the envy of a road cyclist without her bike. Eventually the tarmac turns to spongy spruce needle covered earth, then scrub and huge rocks that shelter us from bits of rain while we eat our packed lunches. Of all the things we talk about, the thing that sticks with me most is a description of her swimming in the sea near where she grew up in Deus. She describes being thrown around in the water, taken by a huge wave, enjoying being pulled around, finding a relationship with it, swimming up for breath. I can see it really vividly. All dark heart of green, black, blue, grey, and the salt and scratch of shifting sand. She mentions this in talking about the way that she likes to make games, about understanding the grain of the material of the things she uses to make work with, the affordances of a certain form or tool or player expectation. She talks about how she likes to pull out the quirks and the accidents. As she says this, it makes me think about swimming by allowing the sea to almost drown you. The child of the wave gets older. Llaura describes herself to me. Her early years, the difficulties she had at school and uni, a couple of years in Dundee, never quite fitting into the world's ideas for her, the pain and violence of non-conformative identity. Then in her early 20s, uni left a successful internship at Microsoft. All of the things you're supposed to want, basically. Walking the path as laid out, but even back in her home country, even following the path of good game development career, Llaura only reflects on a couple of moments of contentment. She returns to water, tells me about a late night trespassing by a huge reservoir, industrial at the centre of the south of Dublin, drunken mischief with friends, sat quietly for a moment around the water. It was perfectly flat. You saw the lights of all the abandoned buildings reflected and the lights of all the business parks too. Just a moment. Sometimes the events and the places that shape us aren't easy. Llaura explains that for a long time she resisted being creative. Her music and art and anything that approached self-expression, she loathed herself so much that expressing it seemed like exactly the wrong thing to do. There was always an element of when you feel like your deepest core is horrific and horrible and reprehensible, you can't relate to people, you're locked up. I'm still trying to work through some of it. At the top of Three Rock Mountain, I ask Llaura, why are we here? Why did you choose this walk? I mean, it's a really nice view of Dublin. And Dublin is a place that feels like home to me now. I moved away, but I kept on coming back and reclaiming it. And we can see the sea. Llaura comes from the fishing town of Killybegs, but mostly she says Donegal when people ask her. And now, finally, she begins to find home in Dublin. She points to the writers' group, the zine and art communities, alternative games folk as reasons why. At the start of our walk, we get the bus. From her house on the seafront, we sit up top in the middle. Halfway through our journey, a gaggle of teenage girls get on and sit at the back behind us. I'm trying to urgently send an email in foreign 3G signal about an upcoming house move, so in my distracted state we are sat in silence. The conversation filters over to us. We go still when we hear that they're talking about trans people. Yeah, but isn't it just like being gay? No, it's about like you're born a guy, but you feel like a girl. So it's being this thing that you feel like what you know, what you are inside. Yeah. Pause. I'm pretty certain that I'm a girl. Me too. and then they move on. Our lives are intimately affected by each other. Whether or not you see or know how your actions and your words are passed on, we are connected. Our lives intersect. In Llaura's more narrative-focused work, Twine Pieces Like a Lit Window, her interest in this is clear. She talks to me about the infinite universes in people's minds, the small moments of interaction and passing. Even in Curtain, she says, you look out the window and what you're looking at is people. Coming into the city from Donegal, I didn't really think I'd be able to sleep even at night because it was so noisy. The city was a big change, like people go past on the bus and you see some of them so briefly, and yet everyone has these universes. It feels to me that's why she's so deeply interested in creating moments in her game design, not simulations. Small moments that encompass the tip of an iceberg of a universe meeting another, rather than trying to simulate the whole, something which no game can yet do. She says, I feel like simulation games can be really dehumanizing. Say you want to make a game about love, you're always reducing, like Passage, which says life is walking through a long corridor and love is the same corridor, but you've got someone with you. I'm much more interested in something like two people in a cafe. You're controlling how they look around the cafe, and if you catch each other's eyes, they look away, but if you do it another time, maybe something different happens. It's a moment you've captured. Rather than saying this is love is X, you're leaving it open for them to interpret according to their lives and according to their experience, which is so much more rich and interesting than like, this is what love is walking through a maze with somebody. The Atlantic coast of Ireland. A ferry crossing the Irish Sea, reflections on a reservoir, a moment stolen from the authorities, the canal that runs through a lit window, rain that dusts our cheeks, a rainbow that squats over Dublin Bay, Llaura's tar badge, orange and red against her backpack. I guess the final thing to say is that Llaura is Irish. I mean, it kind of feels like an obvious thing to say, but it's present not just in the ground beneath our feet, but in the history she tells me at every opportunity, in the place names she dissects, and the nuances of something as simple as the word hello in Irish. She's influenced by her heritage, and by a sense of being on the edge, in her queerness, her DIY culture, her country on the edge of Europe. Ireland's always been this country on the edge of Europe, you know? Disconnected from proper society. Like Irish poets and writers, there's definitely a strong sense of community, but there's a sense in creative people of isolation as well. Beckett, Joyce, Yeats, strangers abroad. The outside view is often of value to culture, always able to look at things seen as normal and point out how really we are all queers and freaks, creatures of extraordinary routines. This is how it started, with the sea. A child, small, dwarfed by the rocks and waves, shrunk both by the scale of the Atlantic and the quality of the men that roughen their hands on board fishing boats across ropes and nets and salted, cold, burnt skin. A child laughing. Before the child is full of ideas of everything they aren't and everything that they should be, before then there's just the child. And the sea. So those are my last words for you. I leave you with the words, and because they are as much mine as the game designers I walked with, I also leave you with a part of me. Because there is no such thing as objectivity. We are affected by our surroundings, the cities we build, the country that grows us, the people we love, lose and pass by in a moment. I have a few thanks. Thanks to VideoBrains. To Jake. Woo! Who gave me the opportunity to stand here and speak to you. And then thanks to all the people I walked with. Thanks to Jake Elliott, to Holly Gramazio, to Kerry Turner, George Buckingham, Ed Key. Thanks to Llaura. Thanks to all my Patreon supporters. There are some of you among us. And thanks to you for walking with me, for listening. Thank you. next, but follow me on Patreon or Twitter and I'll tell you in like a month. Patreon.com/Hannah Nicklin. Thank you!